Hi, welcome back to another video. This video is my March to April book wrap up. I was originally going to do January to April, but I got too lazy. So I'm just gonna do March and April. The first book that I read in March was The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is my second novel of hers. In my previous video, I said that I wanted to read her entire or most of her bibliography, and I still plan to, so I picked this one up. This one is a part of her Hainish Cycle series. It's called a series, but all of the books in the Hainish Cycle are actually standalones. They all take place on different planets, but all of the planets exist in the same universe, which is a really cool idea. So that's why they're considered to be a part of the same series. This one is about a planet that has no concept of gender, like the binary concept of gender. Everyone is androgynous, and the main character is from Earth, and he goes there to learn more about them, like research them and things like that. So the concept is very, very cool. I was super excited to read this, but unfortunately I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I did the first book I read of hers, which was The Lake of Heaven. This one was difficult for me to follow. She had this habit of mentioning words, like made-up words that were a part of this planet's language, and obviously I didn't know what they meant, and so I was hoping to learn their definitions, but she wouldn't define them until pages later or even like chapters later. So it was just difficult to try to remember all the words and their meanings. And the biggest thing is that there's this like very special social rule that all the inhabitants live by, and it plays a big part in the story. And the main reason why two of the main characters have a lot of misunderstandings in the beginning is because of this social rule. It has to do with like pride or something like that, but I never fully understood the concept, and so obviously like I didn't really understand the dynamic between the two main characters. I didn't understand why they were having such a hard time understanding one another, and like why did they not like each other at first, and so it just made it difficult to read. So unfortunately I didn't enjoy this one as much as I did the other one. There were still good parts, and of course I still love her writing, but yeah, this book is just a little hard for me to follow. Then the next book I read in March, actually I read this one in April. I started my April off with The Hole by Hiroko Oyamada. This cover, by the way, is very, very beautiful. It's so beautiful in green, and I love that, and it's a perfect way to start my spring. I also really enjoyed this book. I never heard of this book or this author before, but someone described this book as a mixture of a Studio Ghibli movie and a David Lynch movie, and I love both of those things, so I immediately started reading it. This book is about a hole. A woman falls into a hole, and then after she gets out, she starts to question her reality, and her perception of reality starts to falter. So I love books like that. It is very like reminiscent of a Hayao Miyazaki film. Like that atmosphere from a Hayao Miyazaki film is the same atmosphere you get when you read this book, and I love that. Also, this book takes place in the countryside of Japan, and so that just adds even more to the like feeling of watching a Studio Ghibli movie. So yeah, I really liked reading this. It's a very short read. There's surrealism, but not too much. of it, where it gets to the point where it's just like super confusing. It's like a nice amount, and there's magical realism in it. There's a mysterious creature that may or may not be real, and I really like this book. It was fun to read, and it was nice to read. I'm a big fan. The next book I read was Stoner by John Williams. This I've had on my TBR for a while because I first heard about this book from Sunbeam Jess, who I've mentioned in my previous video. She's a YouTuber. She talks about books and she's amazing. And she read this and loved this. My sister also read this because of her and she loved it. Everyone who has ever read this has loved it, and so I decided to pick it up. It's not really my kind of book that I tend to read. It's like a fictional biography, I guess you could say. You follow William Stoner and you follow him from when he was young, like high school, until he's older, and it's just all about his life and what he goes through. More specifically like his life at this college that he attends and then ends up working at. So it's all about his life. It's not really a book that I tend to go to, like I said earlier, but I loved this book. Like, now I understand why every single person who has read this loved it, because it really is an incredible book. John Williams is an incredible writer, and I'm sure many people already know that. This is my first book from his, and I kind of want to read more, even though he writes books that aren't usually my kind of stories, but I just loved Stoner so much that I want to read more of his works. I don't know how to begin to explain why I love this book. You really just have to read it. There are a lot of unfortunate things and sad things that happen to Stoner, but because of William's writing, he just writes in such a beautiful way that, like, I don't really get upset when something upsetting happens, because I just focus more on like the beauty of the words, and it makes whatever's happening a little less depressing, which is an amazing talent. But yeah, this is just a really beautiful tale about life, about how life doesn't go the way that we want, but also that life has beautiful moments and it's not all miserable. I also really loved seeing the relationship, like seeing the people in William Stoner's life and how they kind of become exactly like him, especially his wife. I loved seeing them kind of become the same person and kind of become like the people that they didn't want to become. Even though it is sad, I just thought like reading that journey was really interesting. So yeah, there's just a lot about this book that I really love. And then I read my first graphic novel in a while, which was The Shadows. It's by Zabas and Hippolyte. I think those are maybe pen names or something. But this is a graphic novel. It's definitely a different type of graphic novel that I haven't read yet. Usually I tend to read more like happy, kind of sort of cliche graphic novels. I also really like reading like children's stories, so I'm used to the more like happy endings and not like there's no plot twist or anything. It's like a simple story to read. So this is about one refugee named Refugee 214, and he is telling his story to the immigration officer because he wants to enter this place called the higher country, and he's from this place called the lower country. And so it is a refugee story. I just really liked seeing this like realistic portrayal of the refugee experience and immigration experience, even though it was sad reading this, and it definitely kind of felt like there was moments of bleakness, but I think that that's a very accurate portrayal of what being a refugee is really like. So I like that they didn't sugarcoat anything. They really like put through this journey with them. You're with them from the very beginning. And I love the art style. It's something that I also don't really, because like the graphic novels I go for are very cutesy, I guess. But this one is more darker, the story and the art style. But also it's bright and it's beautiful. And it also has my favorite shape of character, like of character design. I don't know if that makes sense, but I really like, how do I explain this? I like shapes like this. Like, I don't know if you can see that, like it's gonna be in focus, but it's like the circle shape, the curve, arch shape. Another great example would be the monsters from Summer Camp Island. I just really like the shape. Like, it's very friend shaped to me. Does that make sense? Anyways, I enjoyed this book. I really recommend it. If you're looking for a graphic novel, I would highly recommend this. And then the last book I read was The Sympathizer by Viet Thanh Nguyen. And I absolutely hate this book, which is kind of wild because I don't hate books. I have so much to say. Every time I think about it, I actually get, like, I can feel my blood boil. That's how much I hate this book. And I'm going to try to explain why without screaming and going off on a rant. But if I do, I apologize. It's just every time I even think about this book, even just the cover of this book, I get so angry. I get so mad. Also, if you don't know what the Sympathizer is, you can just look it up. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of it at least. But yeah. So the reason why I hate this book is it's okay. So the main character in the novel is sexist and misogynistic, and that isn't necessarily the problem. Writing unlikable characters is pretty common in any like story, in films and TV shows, in books. That making that choice isn't the problem itself. The issue is that none of it, like him being sexist, adds absolutely nothing to the story. There is an entire page where he talks about cleavage, and I wish I was exaggerating, but it's literally like a huge chunk of the page. It's basically the entire page. And on that page, he talks about how women find it offensive that when guys don't like glance at their boobs. And I understand that he's writing it from the perspective of someone who is misogynistic and sexist, but an entire page, and the fact that none of the things that he writes, like none of the sexist things that he writes have anything to do with the storyline. Like, they don't add anything, and they're huge portions of the stories. He goes on for like so many paragraphs about like just sexualizing women's bodies, and it is extremely nauseating and frustrating. And then the cherry on the top of the cake is he essentially ends the book on a rape scene. What a choice. Like, what a choice to make. And I've read interviews where they ask him like why he did that or why he made the character this way, and his answers are so dumb because he thinks that he's accomplishing something that he's not. But the funny thing is that the ideas that he's trying to get at, like using toxic aspects of masculinity such as sexism and misogyny in order to discuss like masculinity, especially like in a specific culture, in the book Vietnamese culture, is something that can be done and has been done in lots of other novels, like The Left Hand of Darkness, for example. But he doesn't do anything with like the sexism. He just writes really sexist stuff and that's it. It doesn't contribute to the story at all. The women in his stories exist solely for their bodies and their attachments to men. So like their relationships, she's his wife, she's his mother, she's her his lover, or she's a prostitute that he once slept with, like whatever. Like they don't exist as themselves, they only exist to the relationship to a man in one of the, like to any of the male characters in the story. And then the traumatic things that happen to them, they're never fleshed out because none of the women are fleshed out. So anything that happens to her body, you never see how that affects her, or like she's not given room in the story to express her emotions and her feelings on that experience, and instead that experience is taken from her and seen through the male perspective. With the ending, with the rape scene, where he literally takes a traumatic event that a woman experiences and that he witnesses and uses it to talk about his own pain, which is a crazy thing to do, an absolutely crazy thing to do. And I've seen people try to explain it like, oh, it's supposed to really set in stone how difficult it is for him to be an undercover agent, because the premise of the novel is that he's a communist, but he's like a double agent. But that is BS, because literally the entire novel is already about the duality of his identity, like the fact that he's a communist but also he has to pretend that he's not a communist, the fact that he has two friends on opposite sides, they're on opposite parties, like, and then how he's an immigrant, he lives in two different countries, and also that he's Asian, like his dad's white, his mom's Asian. Like the entire book discusses how he's literally split in half. So we already know how difficult it is for him to exist kind of in two different worlds. There was no need, absolutely no need for any of the sexist and misogynistic things that he has written in that book, especially the rape scene. It's so depressing, and I can't believe I was excited to read that book, and I can't believe it won the Pulitzer Prize. I just get really, really angry when I think about that book and how much time I wasted reading that book and how I want to burn that book, even though you shouldn't burn books, it's really bad for the environment. It also reminds me about how much I hate when people say, people meaning like men, and how they don't realize how privileged they are because they can just pick up any book that they want and they don't have to care about who the author is. You know, like when people are like, oh, why would I care about who the author is? Which is a good point. Why would you care? You shouldn't care. But I know that when I pick up a book and I find out that the author is a man, I know that there is a 95% chance that someone who I identify with is going to be completely misrepresented and sexualized. Even if there are even women in their story. So, what a nice privilege that a lot of guys don't. So those are all the books that I read these past 2 months. I don't want to end on an angry, aggressive, sad note. So I'm going to quickly talk about the book that I'm currently reading, which is Tomb of Sand. The Sympathizer left such a bitter taste in my mouth and made me so incredibly angry that I ended up throwing a fit after I finished reading it. And I was like, I'm never gonna read again. I'm taking a break. I hate reading. But I just told myself in order to cool down, I was going to take a month or 2 off from reading, because that's how angry I was. Because I knew I was going to start this book right after, and I was super excited to start Tomb of Sand, and I didn't want to go into the book with such an angry mindset. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a break. I didn't. I started reading this the very next day, and I'm so glad that I did because on the first page of this book it reads, once you've got woman in a border, a story can write itself. Even women on their own are enough. Women are stories in themselves, full of stirrings and whisperings that float on the wind, that bend with each blade of grass. When I read that, I was like, oh, peace has come to earth. Everything is resolved again. Life is beautiful. So I'm so glad I read this book right after reading The Sympathizer, and I'm really enjoying it so far. But yeah, that is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in my next one.